everybody, welcome back to Appa's Kitchen. I'm back in my kitchen, finally. It's been a while since I made a video here, so let's see how this goes. So it's just been crazy raining here. We are having an atmospheric river cyclone bomb. I don't know what they're calling it these days, but a lot of rain. So it's been raining for like 3 or 4 days. Today we got a little break and then it's going to rain again. For the next few days, a lot of water. So what do you do when it rains? You make soup. So today I'm going to show you how to make something really special called scrippelle. Scrippelle, we used to call them just scrippelles. I didn't even know how to spell them until the internet. Basically, it's a crepe that's filled with pecorino cheese and black pepper and served in soup. And this was a special holiday meal that we had. We would have these either Thanksgiving, Christmas, Easter, one of the big holidays, and then that's it. The other soup that we would have was holiday soup, or what do they call it? Italian wedding soup. We didn't call it wedding soup. We called it either escarole soup, or holiday soup. So we would have either scrippelles or escarole soup, wedding soup on the holidays. And that's it. We never had them any other time of year, which to me is crazy. It's really easy to make. They're so delicious. And you can also freeze them. So I'm going to make a batch today and then I'm going to just put them in the freezer and I'll have them for whenever. I made a big pot of chicken soup to go with them. So let me take you over to the counter. I'll show you the ingredients. It's pretty simple to put together. You do need some special equipment, or either you have to have skill making crepes on the stove, which I don't have. So I have a crepe maker, which makes them perfectly if you want to invest in that. Or you can try your hand at making them in a pan on the stove and just see how they turn out. That's how most people make them. All right, so let's go to the counter. I'll show you the ingredients and we'll put it all together. Okay, so the ingredients are pretty simple. For this recipe, this is from my mom, 3 eggs, 1.5 cups of milk she used, but I used water. If you have milk, you can use milk. My sister will often make these if she has some milk that, it's going to go bad. She wants to use the milk. She'll just make up a batch of scrippelles and put them in the freezer. So you can use milk or water. Personally, I don't really find any difference between them, but I kind of like the water. It's just easier. You don't have to worry like I don't have milk. So you got eggs, water, and then the same amount of flour as water. So it's as your liquid. So it's 1.5 cups of liquid and then 1.5 cups of flour. Now, personally, I think that's a little bit too much flour. I like mine to be a little bit thinner, so I'm going to cut it down slightly. For the batter, also salt and olive oil. I don't really measure. I just throw in a little bit of olive oil and a little pinch of salt. And then we fill them with Locatelli, which is pecorino romano, and black pepper. So I'll show you how that's done at the end. Okay, I'm going to take you over to the blender. Just put everything together. It's really simple. I was going to take you to the blender and decided to bring the blender to you. So we're going to start with our eggs, 3 eggs. You can also just do this in a mixing bowl with the whisk. Just made a mess there. So 3 eggs, 1.5 cups of water. The recipe calls for 2 tablespoons of olive oil. So I don't know if that's 2 tablespoons. And then a little bit of salt. I'm gonna just give this a quick mix. And then add cup of flour to start. And I can see that that looks pretty thin. So just as an experiment, let's go for 1.5 cups. You don't really need to whip it or mix it a lot. You just want to mix the ingredients together. And you want, yeah, actually it looks pretty good. So it's kind of coating the spoon a little bit. Let's see how it works out. All right, so I'm going to take you over to the crepe maker and show you how we make the crepes. All right, so my crepe maker is pretty old. I don't remember when I got it. The one that my parents used was from the 70s. It was, you know, Harvest Gold, one of those 70s colors. So these things last forever. It's a good investment. You can also make crepes. The first one is usually a little bit funky. I don't know why. So I'm just trying to get a good coating here. But the first one usually has a lot of holes in it, as you can see. But they get better as they go along. So basically, you just want to cook the crepe. You'll see it start to harden up. It's steaming. It'll stop steaming in a little bit. And then you can kind of loosen the edges. I like to flip them over and just, you know, cook both sides, but I don't think that's really necessary, but that's just the way I do it. So if you don't have a crepe maker and you don't want to invest in one, you could use a nonstick frying pan, or maybe you know how to make crepes and you have your own crepe pan that you use. So just make them on the stove. So while we're waiting for this to cook, let me tell you a little bit about Scrippelle. So the dish of these crepes in broth are called Scrippelle Abruzzo. Basically just Scrippelles in broth. I think it might be dialect. These are from the Teramo Province of Abruzzo, which is where my maternal grandfather is from. And the story, oh, this one's a mess. The story is that during the period when this part of Italy was occupied by the French, rather than eating bread, the French soldiers ate crepes. So there was a chef cooking for a bunch of French soldiers. Let's call him Giuseppe. So Giuseppe was in the kitchen. He had a stack of crepes and a big pot of boiling soup, and the crepes fell into the soup. So he decided to serve them. And that's how this dish was born. Like most of these stories, it's probably partly true and partly embellished, but it is an interesting story, just kind of illustrating the different influences that go into Italian food. Italian food really is a mosaic of so many different cultures and so many different influences. All right, so this one looks a little bit better. You still have a hole. The holes are problematic when you put the cheese because the cheese kind of falls out. But when I fill this one, I'm just going to make sure that I put my cheese on this part and roll it so that I don't have any cheese where the hole is. And then they'll get better as we go along. All right, so you don't need to watch me make all of these. You kind of get the idea. I'll come back again when I'm finished and show you how we fill them, and then it'll be time to eat. All right, well, I know I said I would come back when I was done, but I did want to just show you what it's supposed to look like. So this is the third one now, and you can see I'm getting pretty good coverage on the crepe maker. So basically you just want to cook it until it kind of stops steaming, the edges kind of loosen up, and then like I said, I'll flip it over and just cook the other side a little bit. I don't know that it's absolutely necessary, but that's the way I like to do it. These are a little bit thick. So personally, I would like mine a little on the thinner side, but it's 1.5 cups flour, 1.5 cups liquid, 3 eggs. So that's the recipe. You can play with it. If you're going to be making them in a crepe pan or in a frying pan on the stove, you might want to put a little bit less flour, just so that you can get them to be a little bit thinner. I did try making them once on the stove, and they just came out really thick. Maybe I need to do it a little bit more. So my grandfather, Ettore, who was from Teramo, this comes from his side of the family. He was a tailor, and my mom told me that he used to come home from the tailor shop. His wife had already passed away, so he was alone. He would come home from the tailor shop and just whip up a couple and have this for dinner. So Ettore used to eat them often, but then for us, for some reason, we only got them on holidays. Don't really know why. And we eat them just in a plain chicken broth. But I thought I was being fancy one day and decided to serve them with wedding soup. And then I saw on some Facebook group that apparently that is another possibility. In Teramo, the broth is usually a rich broth, not always just chicken. It could have beef bones and other things in it. So you just want to try to make a rich broth. It is nice to have escarole and meatballs and all of that, but it's also really nice to just have them in a very simple, plain broth. It all depends what you're doing with them. So if you're going to make this as a meal, it would be a perfect meal just with a nice salad. Then make your soup a little bit on the richer side, maybe with escarole and meatballs or whatever you want. But if you're having this as part of a bigger holiday meal, then I would go as simple as possible. Just a nice clean broth, simple broth, and a few scrippelle, and then move on to the next course. Holiday meals for us were huge. So we would start off with an appetizer, antipasto, and then soup, and then pasta, and then whatever the holiday meat was. So on Thanksgiving, we'd have turkey. On Easter, we'd have ham. So we're talking about, eating for 4 or 5 hours with breaks in between to do the dishes and take a little nap. All right, so they're coming along nicely. They kind of remind me of tortillas. So you just keep going, making the crepes until it's all done. As you get towards the bottom here, this is going to start thickening up. I think it kind of starts to cook a little bit. So just keep stirring it, and then if you need to, you can add a little bit of water, and you're going to find that there's a point where you just can't make any more. So you're done at that point. And we'll see how many I get, because I'm not really sure how many crepes this recipe makes. All right, so this is number 11, including the first one, which is kind of funky. Still usable. All right, so 11, starting to get a little bit thick here. So I'm just going to add a little bit of water. And it looks like I'm probably going to get maybe 13 or 14 from this batch. So we'll see. I can just feel in the bottom of this tray it's a little bit thick. So you want to try to, mix this up. I don't know if it's starting to cook or what's going on. But they're coming out great at this point. So getting really good coverage on the pan. I don't know why that first one is always funky. Same thing when I make pizzelles. The first pizzelles are, usually a little bit funky until the iron really starts to heat up and, everything starts working great. All right, so this is number 12. And I should be able to get a few more out of this. All right, so I have a feeling this is probably going to be the last one. It's number 14. So let's see what happens here. Kind of feel it. Yeah. So you see it's really, it's just kind of cooked now. So that's the best that we can do at this point. I don't know if I can repair this. Let me try this. I just made a mess. All right. So that's it, 14. So pretty good. You want to figure maybe 3 or 4 per person, depending on if this is, soup with a big holiday meal, or if you're just having these alone. So plan accordingly. Some people will only have maybe 2, and some people want to go back for seconds. So just make as many as you think you need. They freeze. You can also just put them in a container in the refrigerator and eat them the next day. All you need to do is, I like to bring them up to room temperature if I can before I put the soup over them. So just heat up your soup and then put your soup over the Scrippelles and you have a nice little lunch. The other thing I discovered here, I don't know if it's going to work with this one, but when they're done, it's really easy to just kind of move it around. You don't have to do all this that I'm doing here, but yeah, so it's not really done yet. So when it's done, you can just kind of slide it around and then flip it over. All right, so that's it. So we got 14. This one's a little tattered, and the first one was kind of funky. So let's say we got 12 really good Scrippelles out of this recipe. The next thing we want to do is fill them. I'm going to go down into the middle here and grab one of these rather than starting from the end or the beginning. All right, this used to be my dad's job, and he would always get yelled at. My hands are clean, I just washed them. The best way to do this is with your hands. So sprinkle some Locatelli. I would say don't put too much. Locatelli is salty. And then some black pepper. And this is where my dad would usually get yelled at because he was putting too much black pepper. And then you roll them. Try to roll them as tight as you can, but don't stress over it. And voila, there you have it. So I would probably need another dish to put these on. I'm just going to make a few for now. And then I'll put them in the soup and show you how it all comes together. Now, in my family, we only used Locatelli. We only used pecorino. We never had parmigiano. When we went to Italy in 2019, we had dinner with one of our cousins in Pescara. This was on my dad's side of the family. So these are from Teramo Province in Abruzzo. And Pescara is another province. We were talking about Scrippelles, and we said that we put pecorino. And they said, oh no, use parmigiana. It's a different thing. I made them with parmigiana, and they're actually pretty good, but it's a much milder cheese. This is a little bit stronger, saltier. I love the pecorino. You could use a combination of the two if you want, or just use whatever you have. Just use a good cheese. So Locatelli is a good cheese. Get some Parmigiano Reggiano or whatever. Grate it yourself, buy it pre-grated. Be careful of pre-grated cheeses. They usually have an anti-caking agent in them. Locatelli doesn't, which is why I buy it pre-grated. But a lot of the other cheeses that you buy will have an anti-caking agent, potato starch or something like that. You don't really need that extra starch, so be careful about that. All right, so here they are. They're ready to go. Don't put a lot of cheese. Don't put a lot of pepper the first time you make them because you might be a little bit overwhelmed by the flavor. You can always add more cheese and more pepper to your soup. All right, so let me show you how it all comes together now. All right, so here are my Scrippelles. I have this really nice chicken broth that I just made today. I had a little bit of turkey. There's a little bit of turkey meat and a nice turkey bone that I also threw in there. So basically you just want to cover them with the broth. And then I like to add a little extra black pepper. Flavor with this is like a cacio e pepe. So the pecorino and the pepper. All right, let's go to the table. Oh, one more thing I wanted to mention. It's a little bit hard to eat them with a spoon, especially in this kind of a bowl. It's better if you have a bowl with a low rim. So you can also cut them if you want before you eat them. All right, let's go to the table and try them. I'm getting really hungry now. All right, so here we have it. Oh, it looks so good. Scrippelle in busse, or Scrippelles, as we call them. Crepes in broth. They're just it's so unusual. I mean, this is, something that if you know Italian food, maybe you've heard of it, maybe not, because it's from this tiny little part of Abruzzo. So good. So I like to cut mine up. You can use a knife, use your spoon. It's kind of like a noodle, right? I mean, the texture is a little bit like a noodle, but it's very different. Just make sure your broth is like really hot because it does cool down considerably once you put it over the crepes. So delicious. So there are a lot of things you can do with these crepes. We only had them like this in broth. But a few years ago, we had a big family dinner when we met one of our Italian cousins. And one of my aunts made manicotti with them. So it's just stuffed with ricotta, and I think maybe she put mozzarella. My sister and I talked about it. We weren't really sure, but that's what we do. So sort of like filling that you would use for stuffed shells. Just look at the stuffed shell box for the recipe for that. So ricotta, mozzarella, and pecorino, Locatelli. Fill them, roll them, put gravy on them, bake them in the oven. It's really good. And so much easier than making pasta dough. The other thing I like to do with them is make lasagna. So basically just make a bunch of crepes. The same way that I would make lasagna, put a layer of sauce, and then, you know, layer my sauce, my meat, my cheese, and bake that. In Abruzzo, they make something called a timballo. Timballo is a drum. So using like a big Dutch oven, same thing, kind of like a lasagna, but they don't put any sauce in it, as far as I remember. So it's, you know, layers of meat and cheese, and, you know, sometimes they put hard-boiled egg and other things in it. Not one of my favorite things. But you can check it out. All right, well, so there you have it. I'm happy to be back in my kitchen. This is really, you know, just such a nice winter dish. It's so satisfying, so warming. As a meal by itself, it's pretty light. Of course, you know, we never had them by themselves. So, and my brothers and I, when we were young, we used to have contests to see like who could eat the most ravioli and things like that. So we definitely didn't practice moderation. It's something that you get once a year. You can bet that you're going to go back for seconds. Just perfect. And my broth is so good. The pecorino flavors the broth really nicely. We often put pecorino in our chicken soup. Really delicious. All right, gang. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. Try it. Let me know what you think. If this is something that you have had before, let me know in the comments. Remember to subscribe, and I'll see you next time in Appa's Kitchen. Bye.